one other benefit that I've seen of launching large, and that's this, that when you launch large, I remember reading a book by Steve Sjogren before I started Vantage Point, and he wrote a book for church planners not called Conspiracy of Kindness, that's his servant evangelism stuff, but Community of Kindness that was tailored specifically towards church planners. And I remember him saying that if a church is under about 100, or I forget what his number was, but he said that if a church remained really small for an extended amount of time, he said that in some church contexts, that you could create a toxic atmosphere. And the reason for that was this, that if you have a small number of people coming, then the pool of people that you have to draw volunteers from is that much smaller. And so what you're doing is you're working a smaller number of people that much more. Not only do you have a greater chance of resources volunteer-wise if you launch larger and you have a bigger pool of people to draw from, but you increase your financial sustainability.
Yes.
At the end of the day, churches close down. At the end of the day, it's because maybe God didn't want them to be there, but at the end of the day, it was because they ran out of cash. And if you have enough people to draw from, then you have a greater level of financial sustainability and all of that.
Yeah, so where Mark and I are from in Southern California, if a church is under 100, we would consider that a high-risk church. Because to try and live in Southern California, especially in certain parts of it, and to pay the salary of the pastor and to have any money left to do ministry with in a church that's under 100, it's very difficult to do. Just put it that way. And so that's another reason in this day and age why launching large is huge. So let's get into these. Here's some benefits of launching large. Number one, it breaks growth barriers. We saw that. Number two, it creates credibility. Mark talked a little bit about that. But when you go into a community, I kind of saw myself as a mid-sized guy. I didn't go into a huge community. I didn't go into a really small community. I went into kind of a smaller to mid-size each time that we planted. And so the church that I started in Auburn, California, which is up by Sacramento, about 40,000, Greater Auburn, city limits 12,000. So we came in there and started this church and launched with a couple hundred people, and by the fall we're running 300, 350 the first fall. And people were coming. This one lady came, and she made an appointment with me, never met her. She was attending our church. And she came in my office, closed the door, and we didn't allow that, so I opened the door. You know, I always had a crack in the door. And she just looks across my desk and she says, "What happened here?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "What happened here?" She said, "Overnight, in a few months, there's a few hundred people attending this church. I've lived in this city for over 10 years. There's churches in this city that have been going for 20, 30, 40 years that aren't running near 200. What is going on? Did you bring all these people up from LA?" I said, "No. God brought these people. These are indigenous people to the greater Auburn community here." And it creates this buzz. It creates a credibility, not only with your core group, but within the community that you're reaching. It also provides a larger group of people to assimilate, not only from the previous services, but then when you launch large, now you have a lot of people to follow up on. It facilitates self-support faster. Mark talked about the sustainability. How you guys... You started, you launched large.
Yeah.
How soon were you financially stable and not on outside support?
It happened within a year. We were kind of an exception to the rule. I think a lot of churches usually accept support for about 3 or 4 years, but we became financially self-sufficient within a year.
My background before being with EV Free was Southern Baptist for 20 years. Southern Baptist, we may have, this is a Southern Baptist church. I love Southern Baptist. But the model was 3 years support, up to 3 years if you need it. And then some would even go beyond that. And I thought, when I became a church plant director, I thought, that's crazy. If we do this right and we launch large and we reach a lot of people, maybe put in a little more up front, but reach more people, we can become sustainable in 1 or 2 years as a church plant. And Mark did that, and the majority of our church plants have been sustainable within 2 years. So this financial sustainability is huge, and most churches, when they close their doors, it's not a doctrinal issue, it's not necessarily even a moral failure, it is you run out of cash. It's that cash flow. So that becomes a big one. And then let's talk about this just for a moment, Mark. Number 5 is it creates excitement and enthusiasm. Share your excitement and I'll share yours, just either from a preview or from actually the launch Sunday in Launching Large.
Yeah, man, you do so much in terms of raising support. You do so much in terms of prayer and working through everything that the launch time for anybody is just an exciting process. And you guys are all going to experience this as you start to move towards your first preview service, man. It was exciting. Church planting is like the most exciting and is the scariest thing I've ever done in my whole life.
It's a roller coaster.
Because 5 minutes before that first preview service ever starts, you stand there like a helpless puppy wondering if anybody wants to come to your church.
Yeah.
People were asking me, Mark, how many chairs do I set up? I don't know. Mark, how many Sunday school teachers do we need? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, you conjure up some answers so you don't sound like a bumbling idiot, but that's what I was thinking in the back of my head. But man, when people show up, when you have been praying about this and dreaming about this, and not just Aunt Sally, who's really not going to come back to your church, but when indigenous people from your community that you have absolutely no idea of
your
who
target.
they are, when your target audience actually shows up, let me tell you, not only is that invigorating to you, but every single person on that launch team feels this fire in their belly. You have just earned a couple points with your launch team so that we're going to talk about the W's, when you meet with them the week before, man, they are willing to tow a trailer on their back if they need to because they're so excited about what's going on.
And we started out of a hotel, our first church, and we really didn't know how many we were going to have. We'd done a direct mail out. We'd done some things to gather people. We knew some people were inviting others, but we only had 17 in that core group. That's not a Launch Large core group normally, but that's what we had in the first church plant. And so I got up, and the service was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. And we advertised 10 o'clock. We had everything out. We did a continental breakfast. Our strategy was our core team was going to serve the community. So at 10 o'clock, I got up, and there were 25 people in a room about a quarter of this size, 25 people. And I saw some people coming through the door, but I just got up and made an executive decision. I said, folks, we're not going to start right now. It is 10 o'clock. We're going to start at 10:15. We got a lot of food over here for the continental breakfast. We'll start up in 15 minutes. Well, in 15 minutes, we ended up with 154 people. So people came through, and it was amazing because my heart, like Mark said, my heart was just kind of hanging out there like, this isn't going to work, to like, praise God, this is great, Thank you for bringing all these people, God. This is a wonderful thing. And then the one we did in Auburn, we saw over 300 at the launch, and we had so many, we had more than we even expected for the launch. And we had this, we used all the chairs we had. So about a dozen of us were standing on the wall. And we're just standing there. And I'm standing next to my secretary, Lee. Hadn't had kids yet, been married about 3 years, 25 years old, from Australia, from Melbourne. And so I look at Lee, and she has tears coming down her cheek. And I said, Lee, what's wrong? And she had, Dave, she goes, this is the happiest day of my life. And I said, the happiest day of your life? I mean, I thought about, marrying my wife, Carrie. That was a pretty happy day. Having 3 kids. I'd started a church before, so I knew that. I was thrilled. Don't get me wrong. I was just like, I was electric. But to Lee, being involved in the core team, reaching her friends, she was my voluntary secretary. That was the happiest day of her life. We saw 12 people receive Christ that Sunday. That was an Easter Sunday when we launched. And that's just excitement. It is a roller coaster, let's admit it. Right. You got those high highs and you got those low lows that just kind of go down there. I mean, they just kind of keep going. It is a roller coaster. But that is a wonderful thing about launching large. Number 6, the follow-up factor. You get a lot of follow-up. Right. There is a cost, though, is there not?
Yeah, absolutely.
The danger, there's some dangers, there's a cost. Let's talk about some of the costs. Why don't you start us off?
Probably the first cost that you have is just stress. I mean, there's a lot to plan for when you plan for more people. And so as we begin to talk about going into your first preview service, I mean, for us, we were completely and totally portable. Every church that I've been to up until that time, was not portable, and so we did not know how to do portable church. And so all of a sudden, we had to try and figure out how to set everything up, how to break everything down, how to do that on a weekly basis, how to go back and forth and get this stuff in the trailers and back to the RV storage site and everything. There's so much stress that goes along with the process. And as much as you want to be ready for that first service, man, you're going to prepare, and you're going to prepare, and you're going to prepare, and you're just not going to feel ready going up to that time.
So if you're like an S or a C on the disc, I mean, you're in trouble, right?
You're going to shoot yourself.
If you're not a D,
yeah,
and you're dealing with that, because I remember when you did that, same thing. We got our portable stuff like a week before. I think yours was like a week or days before.
Right.
So you're practicing all this, getting ready for the first preview service. So there is a high stress to you personally, to your family. There's obviously a spiritual warfare that goes on. You're establishing a beachhead, and so the devil does not want to see this happen. So there's all that dynamic. I got sick a lot. Before each church, a week or two, I got sick. The second church I started, a week before, I got laryngitis. I literally couldn't talk. It's like, this is great. I can't talk. We're going to start a church in a week. But God worked all those things out. Higher cost.
Well, while you're on that point, just for a second, you're talking about the launch process and some of the things that you experienced. And that is this. I would say men, this is what I experienced during the launch process, because you're at a slower pace and a rapid fire pace all at the same time. What we're about to talk about is you're going to have one service a month. So it's a slower pace, but it's going to feel like you're going at light speed. And during that time, I felt, this was my own personal journey, you're establishing a beachhead, spiritual warfare. I felt myself maybe tempted more sexually during that time than I have at any other time in my life. And there was a time where I really needed to kind of what Randy was sharing, and I really appreciate him sharing that. I really needed to make sure that in the middle of everything that had to get done, and in the middle of all my own spiritual warfare and temptation that happened, I, as a man, needed to make sure that I was prayed up, because in the middle of getting all the details set, you're going to be tempted to forget about your quiet time. That's going to be important. I needed to make sure and show my wife from day one that my church was not going to be more important than her. So ever since the day we got married, every week for the past 12 years, we have gone out on a date night. And I wanted to make sure that during that preview process and during the launch process, that habit wasn't going to get broken, because immediately she would have known that, hey, we're on a bad move here. So high cost. Sorry, I wanted to add something.
Our date nights were out doing garage sales looking for Fisher-Price cribs to put for the nursery, so we had nursery cribs. But there's a high cost emotionally, there's a high cost spiritually, there's a high cost financially.
Absolutely.
It costs more to launch large. You have the resources to gather. We were talking about this during the break, most of the large launches I've been a part of, and the ones I've helped coach guys, they've had some kind of portable church equipment. It doesn't mean they spent 50 or 100 grand on buying the certified portable church stuff, but some of them did. Others of them, but they got it somewhere. Some of them built it themselves, had a contractor in their church. But somehow they had good equipment. Because you don't just roll into a theater or with a little, 4-channel board or something like that, and, lousy speakers and no cribs for the kids, no Sunday school equipment, that kind of stuff. So there is a high cost, and it's usually upfront cost money. So you have to raise some support. And another thing we don't have down here is you got to start with a team.
Yeah,
to launch large, it's not a solo deal, it's a team deal. So you have a team of people around you. Now, not necessarily anybody else paid, maybe one. Was Tom paid on yours? He was paid by your mother church, wasn't he?
Yeah, for a year.
Tom was. We didn't have anybody, my first one, who was paid other than myself. Second one, we had a part-time worship leader, and that was it. So all the other people on the team had a role, but they were all volunteer. But you need a team to do a large launch.